Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to jump in and get started because we have a lot of really fun stuff to talk about today. And as other people trickle in, we'll just help them get up to speed and we'll just keep moving along. So welcome to the Post-Holiday Mental Health Audit. I'm Natasha Cheyenne. I'll introduce myself a little bit more in just a minute, but first I'd love to tell you about our flow for today's session. We have 30 wonderful minutes together, and so we'll do a quick introduction and framing as to why now? Why is this important? We all know that mental health is important, but how do we stay on top of the journey of being well and work with the rhythms of life? So we'll understand why this post-holiday time, it's exciting because there's new goals, there's all this other stuff. We just came off this really great break, and it can be a little bit stressful as well. So it's just a really tender time for our nervous system. Then we'll do a simple mental health audit. There's not going to be homework or anything like that. It's just a simple framework that you could use on a regular basis. I recommend now just because of the timing of the year. And we'll talk about it across a few different domains and go into some examples of that. And then for yourself, you'll be able to identify 1 to 3 tiny realistic steps that support your mental health and wellness. And I say tiny realistic steps because sometimes, especially with a new year, we get very like, yes, I'm going to set all the goals, I'm going to do all the things. And we totally are. And I love that. And sometimes it's more about consistency than intensity. So we can get to the intensity, but we do that through really tiny steps. As we move through the session today, since it is being recorded, please feel free to put any comments or thoughts or questions in the chat. I have that up so I can monitor that as we move along. And then when we get to the end, I will stop the recording. And I have a few minutes after. So if you want to stay after, if you have any additional questions, then you can feel free to come off of mute and ask me whatever you'd like. But then you also have the safety of not feeling like you're being recorded at that time. So let's do some framing. Like I said, I'm Natasha Cheyenne. My educational background, I have two doctorates. One is in behavioral modification and development, so really deep psychology, and the other one is in cognitive and affective neuroscience. So not only the relationships that we have with that first one, but how our brain and our nervous system actually work and why it responds to things that then cause us to show up in a certain way. As we move through today's session, this is a topic that is so close to my heart because I think that if more people could really understand their nervous system, not what everything is called and be able to put together a diagram, but if they could just really understand, like, oh, this is a nervous system response, we can have so much more control over how we show up and how we care for ourselves. And so that's why today's session is just so important and why it's one of my favorite topics. So let's talk about why this time feels so weird. So post holidays, we had this incredible time, or maybe stressful time, both are fine, time with our family and our friends. But December also really represents this disruption to how we eat, how we sleep, how often and how much we engage with others. I was just talking to a friend earlier this week, and they said of the 14 days they took off, 11 were spent traveling and going and seeing other people. And that's wonderful, right? Like, what a great opportunity. And that's not something we do within the normal flow of our year, within the normal flow of our days and our lives. So it's this, the holidays are just this disruption to a lot of things. It also leaves this emotional residue. So there can be, right after the holidays, whether people have had loss or not, sometimes it's like, I know, I remember I would get so excited to see my mom during the holidays. And then when I would leave, I would just feel this, I would just feel different, right? I'd feel this joy come down, this, a little bit of this loneliness. And then there's also the, if there has been a loss in the year or over the years, we feel, especially at the holidays, because there is so much togetherness, so we can feel a lot of that grief. The comparison really comes into play when it's like, did they get this? Did they get this? Or if we happen to compare ourselves to others online or within our families or within our friend groups. And then that overextension, right? We're eating more than we normally do. We're spending more than we normally do. We're engaging more than we normally do. So there's a lot of emotional residue. I'm making this holiday sound so dark. It's a wonderful time, but it's really important to acknowledge the other side too of what's going on so that we can care for ourselves after. Our nervous system, it loves predictability. It loves it. So as we're moving through the normal flow of the year, your nervous system is like, okay, great. Yes, there's this. This is our normal school routine with the kids, our normal work routine with this. And while that's not perfect every single day and month leading up to December, there is a lot more predictability. And the reason our nervous system loves this so much is because we already have these pathways in our brains that are like, yep, this is what we do, this is safe. And our brain loves to, it's on our side. It wants us to be comfortable. It wants us to make our lives as easy as possible. So that's why when you do something over and over again, your brain just creates a pathway. So it's like, now you don't even have to think about it. Now it's done. And so that's why our nervous system loves predictability. And the holidays are high on predictability. We know that there's going to be this spike. So our brain, our nervous system knows that. But there's also this intensity. So it's the almost the over intensity. And then there's a lot of things we can't predict, right? So maybe somebody shows up in a way that we weren't expecting. Another example, a friend of mine was saying they had all their rooms laid out for who was coming and who was bringing pets so that everybody's pets would be happy, everybody would be comfortable. And then someone who was not supposed to show up with a pet showed up with two dogs. And so again, there's that unpredictability, and it's just a different intensity because we're also trying to create an experience at the holidays. There's also this higher expectation we have of ourselves and maybe we have of one another to create something during this magical time of the year. And in doing that, it just adds this layer of intensity. So we go through all that, and it's wonderful and it's great. And then we kind of on the other side, we expect to be like, okay, now we're back in our normal routine, right? For many people, I know this week was the first full week back. So, okay, great, I'm going to be back in my normal stuff. Our brains also don't work like that. It can't just snap back and snap into the next thing so quickly and so easily. Our brain and our body needs time to recalibrate to us going back into our normal routine. And the reason for that, why that doesn't happen at other times during the year usually, is because of the intensity of the holiday. So if it wasn't that intense, we would be able to calibrate much easier. And I also want to point out here that this is not in any way any kind of a defect or anything like that. It is just the way our brains work. And so with this, like, how do we work with our brain and with our nervous system to recalibrate? So what I love to do, I do this myself. I do this time of the year. I also, when I'm experiencing other things throughout the year that I know are just really intense for myself and my nervous system, I'll do this mental health audit. And so the principles here are to remember that, like, your nervous system also does not do well with a lot of judgment, right? So if we have like really negative self-talk, or you should just get over this, you should just figure this out, or I should just know this or be able to do this, just you can just let that go, because that's not what this is about, and it's not helpful to your nervous system. But when we check in, we can do these little check-ins and then say, okay, I can do something about that. Here's what I can control here. Here's what I cannot control. So of what I can control, what can I now do? So the principles here are this curiosity over criticism. So we're not putting intense labels on things. We're just acknowledging how something feels, what something is, without being like, and then this, and then like doing like an evaluative story about it. And so again, with that, this is just small, honest data without that evaluative story. And then we're not using should language, because maybe there's a lot of things we quote unquote should be doing. That's again not helpful. What's actually happening, and what is the next step we can take? What is the next small, next right step for us that we can take? And then again, we're just gathering information. This is not evidence against yourself as to why we feel maybe deficient or we feel less than or anything like that. We're just gathering some information about ourselves. The more information we have, the better and more resilient we become when these different things happen. So, and when I say resilient, I don't want to go off on a whole TED talk about this, but when I also say resilient, it's not that, great, I'll become more resilient and then the holidays won't impact me, or this big thing won't impact me. It always will, because the world is always changing. These things are always new and different. And that's what's great about them, is there's these new experiences that are ambiguous and they challenge us, and we can be creative in ways we never thought. And it's really about, can I navigate? Resilience here is about navigating through it in the most productive way possible for yourself, so that you don't show up poorly. You show up and it can be stressful and it can be tense. I'm still fully showing up because I have these other tools that I know I can rely on. So here's the framework for our mental health audit. I try to keep it super duper simple. Again, I also love things that I can remember very quickly, because then I don't have to like carry around this notebook of like, oh, here's all my notes for the process. Like, the easier we can make a process, the more likely we are to follow it. So the framework, the first thing is that we're just going to notice what's actually happening. So again, it's not, hey, here's this big thing that's going on, and now I'm going to put all this stuff around it. Just, what are the facts? I'm going to go into a couple examples in a minute. Then we're going to name it. And again, not an evaluative name or a label, but we're naming, like, how does it feel? How does it feel in my body? How does it feel with my emotions? What is this impact on me? And this is a self-reflective piece. And then the last piece is the next tiny step. So what's just one small adjustment that I can make? And maybe that takes 2 minutes. Maybe I need to do it consistently every day for 2 minutes, but it's just one small adjustment. And with this framework, if we just think, okay, let me think about my whole life, that's too much, right? We don't want to overwhelm ourselves. These types of things should be very easy for us. So with that, I have this across 4 domains. So first, this in your body and your energy. So what are we going to notice? Notice things like, how has your sleep been since the holidays? Has it been good? Has it been a little, like, I know for me, my sleep's been a little bit disordered. So that's all I'm noticing. I'm not putting a story around that or anything or trying to guess why. That's just the noticing part. Another thing here is, how are your energy levels across the day? Again, we're just noticing. Here's what it is. Then we're going into the naming part. So again, this is the impact. How does it feel? So with this, I would ask a question like, if my body could leave a Post-it note for me, so I love a Post-it note, what would it say? Right? What would it say to just be like, okay, post-holidays, maybe your sleep's disordered. For me, I know a big thing is when my sleep gets disordered, I let it get more and more disordered by being like, I'll just keep scrolling. I'll just do this. It'll help me sleep. I know it doesn't intellectually, but we also fall into those types of things. So I'll say, okay, the Post-it note I would leave for me is to say, be gentle with yourself. You're moving through this. Remember your process. Because I have a whole like sleep routine process I go through. And I'm not going to say, remember to not scroll, remember to not do this. I'm going to remember the process because it's the whole process that helps. It's not necessarily just one little thing. And then our next tiny step. So one shift for the next 7 days, like lights out 20 minutes earlier, 10-minute walk after lunch for your energy. And the other reason why I say just for the next 7 days is a lot of people fall into this, and especially this time of the year, we're like, every day I'm going to do this thing forever. And we don't really set this timeline. But when we say this next tiny step, and I'm just going to do this for the next 7 days, it also gives us an opportunity and our nervous system an opportunity to view this as a tiny experiment. I'm going to try this for the next 7 days. As I go through that, I'll continue to notice, I'll continue to name, but it's only for 7 days. So then our brain is also like, okay, great, there's a deadline here. And we're more likely to be able to say, yes, I can be consistent for 7 days versus let me do this for the next 365 days. And with the tiny steps, these are just little things. It's not adding a whole bulk of something to your plate. So our next domain is our mind and emotions. So we're going to notice what's the tone of our inner dialogue right now. Are we being more harsh with ourselves? Because again, like the whole like new year, new me concept, which is great, right? We can always evolve, but it can also lead to us being a little more harsh on ourselves than we should be. And then are these recurring, or are there recurring thoughts or worries? Is there something that, whether it was something that happened during the holidays or post-holidays, is there something that is just, you're cycling on it internally? And then when we get to naming for this one, I like to give things a headline. So if this season of my mind were a chapter title, what would it be? So I'm not going into this intense evaluation. I'm just giving it this name. And that can also be a little bit fun because then we're also thinking in a different way where it's like, what is just the quick headline for this? And then that next tiny step, so one supportive mental wellness practice for the next 7 days. There's 2 more domains we're going to walk through here. I also want to say you don't necessarily need to do this for all 4 domains all the time. This is really we're going to notice, name, and next tiny step for the thing that you are noticing is the most prevalent for you. So if you kind of think through them and you're like, okay, my body and energy, or my mind and emotions, right? Or as we get to the other 2, like maybe it's one of those. This shouldn't be something that takes up this, like the bulk of your day, unless you want it to, in which case I love that. I'm a big fan of journaling. I could journal all day if they had let me. But it's really about this check-in so that you can continue to move forward. And going back to our nervous system also loves that. Having this big, intense thing all at once is a lot. That's why the holidays are a lot. So we can give ourselves just these little tiny, like one domain a week, or one domain every few days, or one domain a month, one thing to focus on. So our next domain, here's our relationships and boundaries. This one can be a really big one after the holidays. So right now you would just, for noticing, do you feel more connected, more drained? Both can be true. Are there relationships where your body tenses when you just think about them? And that can be either from the holidays, it can also be jumping back into work or jumping back into our regular schedules. Then we're going to name it. And so with this naming, it's what's one boundary my nervous system is quietly asking for. And so, like, when we think about the boundaries for our nervous system, it's you can say no to one extra thing, right? So it's like kind of the concept of, with this, my plate is as full as I like it. I don't need it to be overfilled. So I can say, I'm not going to do this, or I am going to do this one tiny thing. One thing that also our nervous system loves is a deep breath. And I know that sounds so simple and so cheesy, but there's a lot of research around how if you just take the deepest breath you've taken all day and just really like feel it push out the four corners of your torso, and then you let it back out, that will calm your nervous system better than almost anything else. And when you can let the in breath be slightly shorter than the out breath, so like say you breathe in for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 6 or 8, that also signals safety to our nervous system, because that's how we breathe when we're sleeping. And we typically sleep or can fall asleep when we feel safe. So it signals to our nervous system. Okay, so then our next tiny step for relationships and boundaries, we're just going to script a small boundary or request. Hey, I'm pulling back on weekend or weeknight plans in January to rest more. Again, that could be that one boundary your nervous system is quietly asking for. You're not saying no forever. You're not saying yes forever. It's just, hey, I need to do this thing for myself. And then our last domain here is around work and expectations. So again, we're jumping back into work, especially now. So we're noticing, how are you approaching work since the holidays? Overcompensating, procrastinating, do you feel steady? And then what's the gap between what you're expecting of yourself and your actual capacity? And I'll be very honest, this is something I had to notice about myself this week, where when I jumped in, I was like, great, before we left for the holidays, these 6 things, we'll have them done by the end of the week. They are 100% quarterly things that need much more time. But I kind of fell into that overcompensating, and then just being able to be like, okay, I cannot do that. Even if I work 24 hours a day, which would not be healthy or good, and the work would then no longer be good, let me just be really honest about that and say, yeah, I'm being unrealistic with my expectations right now. And then we're going to name it. Where am I still operating in holiday survival mode at work? And holiday survival mode is that, like, it's intense, it's intense, it's intense. And I'm just going to keep that intensity to feel like I can catch up at work and feel like I'm back in to the flow of things. So with that next tiny step, this is one expectation that you're just going to downshift, like making a deadline, delegating one task, or making one meeting an email. So again, the next tiny steps across all 4 domains, they are just very simple. You could literally do a step from each domain, not that you have to, but you could do a step from each domain within the first 30 minutes of your day. But that's what it's about. It's about this consistency of being able to do something. Also, a lot of times when we have a list of things to do, if the most important thing we need to do is too big, if our brain sees it as too big, we are always going to push it off. It's going to be that item on your to-do list it's been on your to-do list for a year and a half now, right? Just, that's a dramatic example, but it just stays there for too long. So again, now we have this tiny step. If you can design tiny steps within these this mental health audit to be small enough that it only takes a couple minutes, you're also more likely to do it. Okay. So next steps. Audits like this are really only helpful if, like I said, I'm going to test this out. I'm just noticing, I'm gently naming those next tiny steps. It's about compassion to yourself. We have enough external pressures and external stuff that my mom always used to say to me when I was a kid. She said, you need to talk to yourself like you are your best friend. And so with stuff like this, it is about like, I need to be the most compassionate to myself and acknowledge what my mental wellness needs, what my nervous system needs. That does make me better for engaging with others, whether that's with my spouse, with my kids. We can't pour from an empty cup. So it's like, how can I review these things as compassionate experiments that help me and not another set of rules and expectations that I have to follow? Because then also with that, it'll fall off, right? We won't do it, especially with something like this, where it doesn't feel like we're not getting compensated for it. We're not doing, we're not getting these other things for it. So if it becomes just a set of rules, they're the rules we won't follow. But when we can really view it as that compassionate experiment, and with those 7 days, then I'm going to try something else. Maybe I'll try something else, or maybe this really worked and I want to turn it into a habit. We're just trying it out. And like I've already said, just that 7 day commitment doesn't have to be a forever commitment. And I used to be super guilty of this, especially when I was in my 20s, where it's like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to do this thing every day. And that was probably the extent of the goal, if I'm being honest at the time. I wasn't very good at goal setting. But when we can do something for 7 days and then we can adjust it. We can look at it and say this worked or this didn't, and we can change it. We will still not be perfect at this. That's the point of an experiment, is that it's still going to feel wobbly. We totally normal. Your nervous system is figuring it out. You're figuring it out. You're now learning how to work more with your nervous system. And then I just always recommend a weekly mental health audit just as a check-in. Again, you don't have to do all 4 domains. You can pick the domains that are impactful or mean the most to you. And then just focus on that one. I like to check in weekly, check in as often as is reasonable for yourself. Okay. And some support and resources. So I have so many free things on my website. So please, if you want to check that out, I do a monthly blog where I talk more about this. This month, I am talking about not panicking with the introduction of the new year, and I align it to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because I'm a really avid reader, so I love to tie things to other kind of fun things to expand the conversation. I do one of these webinars once a month. They're always free, so please feel free to join me. You can find more of that on my website as well. I have a weekly newsletter, and then this session and all future sessions and all past sessions are available on my YouTube channel. So thank you so much. I will stop the recording now. So if anyone has any questions or anything for me, I am happy to answer all of those.